I want to ask you a question that I don't think anybody has ever asked you before,
Okay.
and that is, what is the meaning crisis, and why are we living through it?
The irony is welcomed. Thank you. Um, so, of course, there's a long answer to that, and so any answer I give is going to be simplified, hopefully not oversimplified. Um, the main There's two sort of main dimensions. One is, what is it like? What am I referring to with this? And then the other is, how is it showing up? The first one goes something along the following lines. Um, the very processes that make us intelligently adaptive make us sort of perennially prone to self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior. And across cultures and historical epochs, people have found what I call ecologies of practices. I don't mean that just a set of practices. I mean practices that have like a dynamic relationship to them. Like a prototypical example is the Eightfold Path of Buddhism, right? In order to try to ameliorate uh, the self-deception without, of course, hamstringing the adaptivity. And getting that, which takes nuance and complexity and, adaptive fit to a variety of environments, and trying to enhance the way our cognition is fitted to the world to afford flourishing. That combination of things has typically been called wisdom, or the cognate terms. And one way of understanding the meaning crisis is that those ecologies of practices have to be situated in some kind of homing environment, a temple or a dojo. Um, and that homing environment and its tradition typically have to be legitimated by a worldview. Um, Now, I want to make something very clear, and I make it repeatedly clear. I'm not here advocating any kind of nostalgia. I've said, you can put on my tombstone, neither nostalgia nor utopia. But what I'm trying to say is, what has happened in the West is, as Peter Berger puts it, we've lost that sacred canopy. A lot of these institutions have come into question, and the places where people go to cultivate that wisdom are largely becoming less and less viable. So the fastest growing demographic group are the nuns, the NONESs. And if you look at the demographics, many of them are still, they will describe themselves as spiritual, but not religious. A very nebulous description, but it's pointing to something. They're seekers. And so there's a hunger for that across the culture. Um, I sometimes do this with my students, Alex. I'll ask them where to go for information. And like in a cyborg fashion, they hold up their smartphone that's just there. And I say, well, where do you go for knowledge? And they're much more tentative. They've been sort of, sensitized by postmodernism. They'll say science, history. Then I say, where do you go for wisdom? And then there's an anxious silence. Um, and so what the meaning crisis is that leads to a proposition on my part, a proposal, which is wisdom is not optional, but it's also really not readily available in our culture. And that ill-fittedness is causing a meaning crisis. Another way of thinking about it is, in that sense, a wisdom famine. Um, and how I think that's showing up, and this is work I've done with Christopher Mastropietro and Philip Mizovic and the book we published and other stuff, is, in a set of sort of interrelated symptoms in the West. Of course, you have a loneliness epidemic. The number of connections people have, the quality of the connections are going down. People feel more and more beset by bullshit. And I mean that in the technical sense that Frankfurt uses it. You have a lot of political ideologies that have a very distinct pseudo-religious feeling to them, and participation, trying to fill that gap. And on left and right, I'm not taking a particular political stance here. Of course, you have mental health crises, addiction crises. Many people are now coming around. My good friend and colleague Mark Lewis said addiction is this much more profound relationship between an agent and its arena. Anyways, there's a whole host of things, and it's plausible that what they share in common is this hunger, sort of a scarcity around this ability to appropriately connect and fit and get the sense of belonging. And so that work also overlaps with all the work that's being done in meaning in life, and or the work that's being done on the psychology of belonging. Like basically, if you don't have a sense of belonging, you're really messed up on many dimensions.